and I'm here to answer the question that we all know you really came here for. Which one of these movies is a better Christmas movie, okay? Which one of these movies does Santa Claus put on after he's done his delivery run? Welcome to Film Fights, where we don't just talk about movies, we make them fight. Today, finishing our first round of our 80s action movie tournament with Die Hard versus Lethal Weapon. I've been excited about this one for a while. These are two 80s action classics, and I was very excited to see them, and they both did not disappoint. The poll beforehand is actually right now a split 50-50 from our viewers, so this is going to be a close one. And if you would like to be more involved in these polls, or you want to make sure that you catch each and every episode of the Film Fights podcast, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and also comment down below which movie do you guys like better. Now, without further ado, let's get into Die Hard versus Lethal Weapon. For round one, we have narrative and pacing, which is worth a total of 10 points from each of us. I think what makes Die Hard so special is just how they set things up within its narrative. There's a lot of little payoff throughout the entire story that I think makes this a very, gives it a cathartic experience. You know, you set up the conflict with his wife at the beginning, and then you set up who he is at the beginning, and him sort of overcoming the challenges of these German high echelon robbers, essentially robbing this Japanese company. I think it makes for an interesting setup, an interesting premise. Bruce Willis having to go through and stop these guys in this one building where all the craziest things are happening is, I think, very impressive. And I like how they pace everything within that. Kyle, help me out.
So Die Hard's pacing is definitely, I might even say it's its strongest quality overall, just because for me this has been such an exciting movie to watch over and over every year. Of course at Christmas time. It has immaculate pacing because it gives the right room to breathe, but it has just so many great action scenes. It doesn't feel like chock full of them. It's not like constant action all the time. It gives room to breathe. Yes. It gives room for characters and a lot of great dialogue. It has a really good plot. It doesn't have a strong, solid narrative exactly because there's not really character development for the main characters, which is fine. The important thing is the movie knows that, so it's not trying to spend all this time with character development. It's showing you the plot. It works really well within those confines.
It's like they have little setups of things where
what Hunter was saying with how they have little setups. You can kind of figure out a little bit what's going on, and then you learn that you're right or wrong, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, it's fun when a movie does that, so it's like you're figuring things out alongside the main character.
I think one little moment that I would say that helps sort of showcase sort of satisfactory setup and stuff. I like how the whole movie, he's completely barefoot. And so at some point they shoot glass on the floor, and so he has to walk on this glass, and you're wondering like, well, what's the point of him being barefoot the whole movie just for jokes? But then they have to lean into that. There's tons of that type of stuff throughout this movie that's just like smart little attention to details that you wouldn't necessarily expect from an action movie, but I think gives it a greater sense of satisfaction.
Right. Yeah. And wasn't the whole reason he was barefoot in the first place is because of the first scene in the movie? Yeah. He was at the airport, and the guy was like, "You should curl your toes on the carpet if you want to relieve stress."
Yes, right? Exactly.
And then so he takes off his shoes, and then this terrorist attack happens. Well, he doesn't have enough time to put his shoes back on, so he's just running around barefoot for the rest of the movie because he doesn't have his shoes on because he was doing this toe curling method thing.
Yeah, the broken glass scene was. I was excited to see what you guys thought about it because it's exactly what I thought. I'm like, that's.
Brutal.
I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's really bad.
Yeah, I think that it's just a really fun setup for an action movie. You could argue that it's simple, but I think what it does well is it executes its simplicity in a way that elevates the material without being pretentious at all. It finds that tone and it sticks with it. A little bit of a dark humor at times, and I think it works really well. I'll say this for narrative more than characters. Some people make questionable decisions when you're like, you know, you have the leader of the organization, John McClane, and you don't kill him. You just kind of let him do whatever. Some decisions were a little bit questionable, but overall, really top-notch stuff. Moving in to Lethal Weapon, I'm here to answer the question that we all know you really came here for. Which one of these movies is a better Christmas movie, okay? Which one of these movies does Santa Claus put on after he's done his delivery run? That's what you need to ask. It's tough because Die Hard has that's the one night on Christmas Eve setup, which I think is nice. But Lethal Weapon has more of the thematic elements of, you know, family and stuff. And
yeah, you know, the movie starts with Martin Riggs putting a gun in his mouth about to kill himself, and they teach him the meaning of Christmas.
Exactly, and he decides not to kill himself, you see? It's like A Wonderful Life. Think about it like that.
If it was July.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, none of these movies are like what you would think of as real Christmas movies. I know, controversial, but
Wow.
I think that they seem like they
are coming in, man.
they're coming in. I'm gonna get the 4 paragraph comment that saying like, hey, this is why Die Hard's a Christmas
It's
movie.
about to be a heart part 6 dislike ratio, man.
But I think they're good movies to turn on around Christmas time just because they take place in the Christmas season. Lethal Weapon, getting into the actual narrative and plot, what I like is, unlike Die Hard, which, as Kyle said, just tells you basically everything you need to know, and the characters are catching up with what the audience already knows, Lethal Weapon has you find out things with the characters, with our 2 protagonists, Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh. And I think that in and of itself is fun because most people like a good mystery and trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And it's not like a murder mystery necessarily. I mean, it kind of is. They're really uncovering this deep plot about a heroin ring and shadow companies and suspicious government activity in a lot of ways. That in and of itself was fun to discover as you're going along in the movie.
Still, there's maybe a stronger way to do it. I do agree, and I like the plot, and it's a fun mystery plot, and it's cool to watch. It's just, I think it would be a little bit stronger if it had some of the details to help you try to solve it. So usually, you know, with like a murder mystery, you meet the perpetrator pretty early on in the movie, and then you have to decide like who it is. And this one, pretty clear who it is, like the villain. It's just, like the things we have to figure out, well, we're not really figuring them out as the audience. It's still entertaining to watch, but I guess it's just not that kind of mystery movie.
I agree with what you're saying. It's not like a murder mystery where it feels like all the pieces are there. It's just you're figuring out the plot a little bit more as you're going on. But the reveals aren't necessarily like, who is the bad guy? We know who the bad guy is and stuff. But there are little things that you can sort of piece together beforehand and find out, like his buddy, Hunsinger or something like that, who basically called him before. It's like, oh yeah, he called you randomly beforehand, and then later on he's like, oh yeah, I was just calling to see if you could help my daughter.
There was definitely something up
or like
there.
And he didn't buy it, but you can infer maybe that's not really why he called. And so I think there's little things just like that throughout the movie that can help you capture what the overall plot is that makes it work really well. And I also think it's a very, in a lot of ways, influential plot. Just like Die Hard really sells you the everyman, regular, stereotypical looking kind of dude who's like an action hero. I think Lethal Weapon's what started that buddy cop movie.
There are also clues to each character's backstory. It makes great use of being in a buddy cop movie by when we as the audience figure something out about the characters, their partner is also figuring something out about them. They're learning more about each other while we learn about both of them over the course of the movie. And that's pretty entertaining. And I feel like even newer buddy cop movies kind of miss out on that.
I like how it's not too goofy. Probably the goofiest thing in the movie is like the guy unloading a clip from like 100 meters and hitting every single shot in the head.
He drew a smiley face
In like 3 seconds. I don't think that's possible, but hey, maybe. Don't know what they're teaching over at the Special Forces. But anyways, I think overall it was entertaining while also, like y'all are saying, having dark moments. And I thought it was pretty interesting plot.
Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Die Hard.
All right, so for Die Hard, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. I really liked how I felt involved in the plot and how everything seemed to make sense. And it always felt pretty realistic to an extent, obviously, but I just thought it was really interesting.
For me, Die Hard gets a 9 out of 10. Great, satisfying setup and payoff, as well as a plot that moves along at a brisk pace that never slows down unless it's important.
I think I'll give Die Hard a 10 out of 10 for narrative and pacing. I think the pacing's immaculate. The plot is incredible for what it's going for. The narrative's probably the weakest point, but I think it's better to not spend time on a narrative that you're not going to have a very strong approach to.
Now let's score Lethal Weapon.
So for Lethal Weapon, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. I'm just making it slightly below because I did enjoy the pacing of Die Hard slightly more, and I thought the narrative, Lethal Weapon might be a little stronger, but overall, I kind of think I just enjoyed Die Hard's story a bit more.
I am giving Lethal Weapon a 9 out of 10, being the fence sitter that I am. I think that these are actually really close, to be honest. There's things I like a little bit more about each movie, and I don't feel comfortable giving one movie a clear advantage.
I'll give Lethal Weapon a 9 on narrative and pacing. It was stronger than I expected, but when I tried to come up with flaws, I couldn't come up with many. Maybe just that the ending doesn't feel quite as conclusive as Die Hard. It doesn't feel as cleverly constructed, but other than that, there's a lot of amazing things in this plot.
Moving on to round 2, we're going to have characters and acting, which is worth a total of 5 points from each of us. I think the characters in Die Hard is one of its strongest elements, not because they necessarily go through these amazing character arcs where they change a whole lot. It's just that they're really entertaining characters that are fun to watch. Obviously, you have the main protagonist, Bruce Willis, playing John McClane. Bruce Willis does such a great job with this character of playing this everyman that's clearly here to survive, and he's getting super frustrated and he loses his cool a bunch, but he's trying his very hardest, and he does have some skills from being a New York cop, so it is a little bit more believable. He has these struggles he's trying to come over in his personal life, and then obviously physical struggles once the building gets attacked. I think him being able to overcome both of those struggles is what makes him a satisfying and entertaining character. And a funny little tidbit for you is that when they were casting for Lethal Weapon, they actually were thinking of having Bruce Willis play Martin Riggs. And then when they started casting for Die Hard, they were thinking maybe we could have Mel Gibson play John McClane. So they almost had each other's roles. There's a future where they might have swapped.
I think it's better, though, how they did it.
No, for sure. 100%.
I would say they don't have real character arcs in this movie. You have one maybe at the end with Al, the cop he talks to on the radio, where he gets his moment to shine, but I get it, and it's nice, but it was a little cheaply earned, in my opinion. Other than that, there's not real character arcs exactly, which is fine, because I think it's good that the characters take kind of a backseat for this overarching plot. It's more interesting to see how they react to that. Acting is phenomenal in this movie. All the performances are amazing. Even his wife, is it Holly? Usually when you have the main girl in a movie, we see sometimes that she's the one that's holding it back, but she actually did really well. She had a great performance. She has some very strong moments, like talking to the main villain and everything. And yeah, like you were saying, Bruce Willis does an amazing job at portraying a guy who's completely in over his head. And a lot of action heroes are a little too stoic for that. And I think he was a good choice. It's not something that shows a weakness in the character. It just shows just how serious the situation is. And a really good performance makes that hit home.
Couple more characters I just want to point out real quickly. I thought Alan Rickman's performance as Hans Gruber was excellent. The way that he plays this villain is where he's like this kind of pretentious douchebag who thinks he's better than everyone else, but he's also just seems so done with the situation where he's just like, why does this keep happening to me? It's really, he has this level of elegance to him, I would say, but also a bit of a threatening nature. And I like that he gets to be the brains of the operation. Well, he's got the main muscle character, Carl, I believe his name is, played by Alexander Godovnov, who actually died at the young age of 45, unfortunately. So it's kind of sad to hear. But yeah, he plays the muscle character really well as the greatest physical threat, and he even has a challenge he's trying to overcome because his brother gets killed by Bruce Willis at the beginning of the movie. I like that even with the villains, they're trying to obtain something, the heroes are trying to obtain something, and it just makes for an interesting watch.
So a character I really liked, like not didn't like the personality, I liked how they did him. Hart, played by Hart Boschner Ellis, he's kind of introduced as this like idiot a bit, like this, like they walk in on him doing cocaine,
like the sleazy business guy,
and so that he's introduced like that, and then he just has no situational awareness. It's just showing he doesn't really have situational awareness. And then later on in the movie, when he's getting held hostage by what he assumes to be a terrorist, he's like, yeah, let's sell out John McClane because he's clearly going to get us all killed. Even though if he knew anything, he'd know that we're probably all going to die anyways. So he tries to sell his way out. He's taking it really lax. At the end of the day, he's being held hostage by people who don't really care about him at all, and they will waste him. They've already wasted Takagi, right, at this point. It's cool to see how his ignorance was the downfall of him.
I think that character is just really fun. There's just a lot of really fun characters in the movie.
And one more thing I like to say, I like how Hans, while he's very elegant and professional, I did think it was interesting how part of his death was really caused because his pride got the best of him, and he wanted to get one over Bruce Willis. He tries to hold Bruce Willis's wife hostage, or John McClane's wife hostage, when he really should just escape, and he just wanted to get one over on him before he succeeded. And I thought how even throughout with all his elegance and stuff, I thought it was interesting that he succumbs to
silly revenge plot.
Yeah, petty revenge.
But that's realistic in itself, though.
Moving on to Lethal Weapon's characters, I think that the best part here is just Mel Gibson and Danny Glover as Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh. Specifically, Mel Gibson, who we gave a little bit of flack in our Mad Max versus Escape from New York, where we thought his performance as Max was a little bit muted. 2 out of the 3 co-hosts thought that Max's performance was a little bit weaker, and Gibson really brings it as Martin Riggs. It was a complete night and day, I believe you said, for us specifically, where there's that scene where he's putting a gun in his mouth because he's so sad about his wife being dead, and his facial expressions, the tears in his eyes, everything there comes together. But even cooler than that is at the beginning of the movie, which sets up that scene where Gibson, or Riggs in this case, is got this crazy unhinged energy where the guy's got a gun on him and he's like, don't move or I'll blow his brains out, and he's like, I want you to do it, like the Joker or something, like screaming in his face, and it distracts the guy. And as an audience member, I'm like, okay, is this like a tactic? Is he trying to like distract? I'm like,
he genuinely just doesn't care.
I'm like, weird tactic, bro. But no, it's setting up bro is borderline, if suicidal, if not just plain suicidal.
Definitely just plain suicidal.
Which is what sets up the plot as it goes on, and he gets sucked into this whole thing and stuff like that. And I think having this crazed, on the edge special forces cop playing against Danny Glover's Roger Murtaugh works really well, who's just a by the book, been doing this for a while, just trying to, live his life.
Old for this.
He's too old. He's as he says many times. And so I think that their chemistry is really solid, and it's something that Die Hard doesn't have. Not that Die Hard needs that. It's just this chemistry, this bouncing off of each other between the two protagonists. However, what I believe Die Hard has that Lethal Weapon doesn't have is much better villains, and I think that it's even pretty easy to compare, like Carl from Die Hard to Mr. Joshua from Lethal Weapon, and Mr. Joshua is like a Walmart Carl, in my opinion. And I think he's still good. But if you want to talk about being like the Walmartist version, it's like that random general dude who I don't even know his name from Lethal Weapon to Hans. It's like not even close.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. Where I think the villains in Lethal Weapon are relatively weak, especially in comparison to Die Hard, which has really strong villains. And I feel like they're just not super compelling in a way. Like Mr. Joshua, for example. Like I'm not exactly sure if he's supposed it's almost like he's supposed to be the main bad guy. It kind of reminds me of Commando. And I know
It is a similar setup because you have the hired muscle character that's loyal to the brains of the operation, but the hired muscle has beef with Mel Gibson's character just because, I don't know, some war back in the day in Vietnam, some special forces
it's
thing.
almost exactly the same
It's
as
a
Commando.
very similar setup to Commando. I think what really hurts the villains is I think the setup is fine. It's just that Mr. Joshua doesn't have a whole lot of personality other than he's evil. I would say he's decently intimidating, but outside of the two protagonists, I would say that the characters aren't anything special. I like that Roger has a family. I think his family is charming. But everyone else is just kind of like take it or leave it. Like, okay, like you're here, I guess. And it's like, I'm not mad that you're here, but it doesn't have the stacked character list that I could just keep going on and on about in Die Hard. Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Die Hard.
For Die Hard, I'm giving it a 5 out of 5 for characters. I think every character is really strong, and I can't really think of a single character I don't think puts in an amazing performance.
I am going to give Die Hard an incredibly strong 4. It's really, really close to a 5 for me, but I just think there could have been a little bit more in the character arcs department, and the one character arc they do have for the cop I thought was pretty undercooked.
I agree with everything you said. I gave Die Hard a 5 though, because even though the one character arc was a little cheaply earned, I care more when they put a lot of time investment into character development and character arcs, and then there's no payoff. Whereas I think this one was so tightly packed with great character moments and great performances that all work in service of the movie.
Now let's score Lethal Weapon.
For Lethal Weapon, I was really debating giving it a 3 or a 4. The reason I was debating a 3 or a 4 is because basically the only really strong characters are the two main protagonists, though I think that they're so strong that it kind of carries this movie to a 4.
I agree with you. Fence Sitter Hunter coming back because we got Lethal Weapon out of 4. Yes, I agree with the fob. I think there's not any bad characters. I think there's serviceable characters and then two extremely strong protagonists. It's not quite as high of a 4 as Die Hard for me, but I still think it's a 4.
I agree. So I gave Lethal Weapon a 4. With the only flaw being some not very strong villains, but outstanding performances from the protagonists that carry this movie and make it so entertaining to watch.
For round 3, we have action sequences and choreography, which is worth 15 points from each of us. When it comes to action, Die Hard is almost a masterclass.
Yeah.
I would say. I mean, I'm just going to get whatever negatives I have out of the way because they don't really exist. You could maybe just say that they weren't,
yeah, the
they weren't,
we have here are kind of
they,
bullshit.
yeah, it's like, they could have framed it a little bit better or something. Some of the fights could have looked a little bit more
reflection on that.
Yeah, it was a little bit unrealistic. All right, throw that out. We got that out of the way. Basically, Peak, when it comes to like 80s action, Die Hard's the most impressed I've been maybe this entire list. Other than Conan maybe
John
because
Rambo.
my expectations were so low. But
I don't know, man. Rambo First Blood is pretty.
is better than Rambo. It's
Well,
better.
yeah, I
The
wouldn't
action
call that.
is better than Rambo.
I say they're
I think
they're working. I'd say they're
This is top of the line stuff. Like
I think so too. This is about as good as it can get, and it's top of the line, grounded action, and it's it has everything I love. Where it feels intense with the way characters are moving. The way John McClane runs in a lot of scenes adds to a lot of tension because it feels just realistic, and there's such a variety of action set pieces. Maybe this is just the male brain, but I feel like when I'm going around a place, I'm like, oh, this would be a good action scene. Like if you're walking around generators or something, it's like, oh yeah.
And one thing I'd like to say, it's really cool how despite the whole thing taking place in one building, they have such a variety of different like sets for the action to be actually happening in.
Exactly, but it never...
And that might go into cinematography a bit, but...
Well, it does apply very much to action because
it keeps things interesting and fresh.
It's like, there's those games out there where you just feel like you're running around the same halls and the same corridors doing the same things, and it can get monotonous. This movie never feels like that because they find a way to have either variety in what the characters are doing in a similar looking place, or they find they're doing something in a different place. I mean, you have them fighting in boardrooms and then elevator shafts and then generator rooms and then on top of a roof, and then there's that really cool shot where Bruce Willis it looks like he's in a jungle on fire, but he's just in like a certain part of the hotel where like it's raining because of the fire alarms have gone off and stuff, and it's this beautiful red lighting, and that's obviously more cinematography there, but it just looks really, really cool in an action standpoint. I mean, when I say it looks really cool, it's executed incredibly well. So much with the explosions, so much with the guns. Top of the line. I don't really have much else to say.
Yeah, it's peak.
Peak.
When they're going hand to hand, it feels like they're trying to kill each other. And that's the most important thing, is I never feel like they're doing anything too stupid necessarily. Or if they are, it's acknowledged.
Moving into Lethal Weapon, it is admittedly not as strong as Die Hard. I don't think that means it's bad. It's just not Die Hard. But I do think there are cool things worth noting in the movie.
My favorite action sequence was probably when Riggs kind of took out the guy while chained up from his arms, kind of hanging from his arms, and he took out the guy who was torturing him. I did really like that scene.
Yeah, I mean, they have lots of great stuff. You have a short shootout, obviously, early on in the movie. Him and Roger taking out people, but one thing I was really impressed by is when this helicopter just comes up out of nowhere and shoots one of these guys because, he's part of the conspiracy. And that helicopter got really close to that house, and I was impressed because that looked like a real helicopter. That looked like real professional stunts. I was impressed with that myself, and I think that they framed it really well. There's obviously that really intense shootout in the desert, which had a very Western flair to it, which I also thought was really cool, and how they had the upper hand and they lost the upper hand, and it turned out to be a big debacle for our heroes, but it was still really cool. Then obviously we have that scene that the Fob was mentioning where Riggs is able to take out the guy while holding the chain, and that just looked really cool. It was lit really well. And then I think maybe my favorite action scene is when they're trying to escape, and you just have Riggs doing his Tom Cruise run through the streets, trying and shooting him down, blowing up the car, continually chasing him down, and then you have one little final action scene at the house. I just think there's still really good stuff here. It just never quite matches the spectacle and heights of Die Hard.
It's good that the action builds up over time to higher stakes and more spectacle action sequences. Usually early on, it's just one guy that they're fighting. It's kind of a small and short sequence, and then over time they become longer, more enemies, higher stakes. That's very good things to do in an action movie because it keeps you engaged with it. I would say like the last action sequence is maybe the weakest, just because it goes on a little too long. The stakes are kind of low because, I mean,
there's like a bunch of cops.
If Riggs loses, then they win anyways because there's a bunch of cops.
Yeah, there's no stakes.
And it doesn't feel like that. Feels like an ending there should be when there's a stronger character dynamic and that narrative is being concluded. Otherwise, it was a very good action scene. There were very good action scenes throughout the movie.
Yeah, I will defend that last action scene just a little bit. I liked that they were using actual martial arts moves that I thought was cool. Not something that I always expect from these 80s movies. It didn't look like just the cheesy punches.
Right. I thought the choreography wasn't bad. I just feel like it would have been cooler if they could do it in a setting that wasn't as controlled, and they would have less. There's more stakes.
It's just weird. Well, it's edited a little bit weird. Like, it feels like the camera's really close and it's dark and it's raining. It's like a precursor to popularized shaky cam. So I didn't necessarily like that. And it is just super weird that there's a bunch of cops just watching these people throw down and not stopping because Murtaugh's like, hey, let him fight his fight. I'm like, no, stop. He could die. And he almost does. It seemed like this horrible thing. I'm like, just have the cops come later for a little bit of narrative.
Or even if it was like the guy was in the house,
no
just let him go in alone.
Yeah.
Even that would make more sense. But if he's outside and he's surrounded, just take him down. It's a waste of time.
He doesn't have a gun. It was like the silliest thing ever. But I still kind of like it, and I think all of the other action scenes are super, super good. Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Die Hard.
For Die Hard, I think most people probably expect this 15 out of 15. I think this is really peak of action movies. I think this is only the second 15 I've given throughout this entire tournament. So, really, really good.
This will be the only 15 I've given in this entire tournament. Die Hard gets a 15 for being the pinnacle of 80s action and everything all of this tournament has just been building to.
Die Hard gets 15 across the board. Take another turn. Yeah, it's the pinnacle of action. There's a reason it's number one on most people's 80s action movie lists. It has everything I love. It does it flawlessly, and everything about the movie services the action so well.
Now let's score Lethal Weapon.
Lethal Weapon, I'm giving it a 13 out of 15. Really solid, really, really good.
I'm giving Lethal Weapon a very strong 13. If it wasn't for the questionability of that last action scene, it might have been a 14. But I just think that it falls short in a couple of areas, leaving it to be a 13.
I will give Lethal Weapon a 12 out of 15. As a reminder, that's still a really good score. It's just, I think this is one of the areas that to say it lacks in that isn't proper, because it is really good. It's just, I think you could do a little bit better, and especially like in the later parts of the movie, I desired a little bit more from it.
For round 4, we have cinematography and special effects, which is worth a total of 10 points from each of us. For round 4, we have cinematography and special effects, which is worth a total of 10 points from each of us.
Okay, so I think cinematography is probably Die Hard's second best section. It's shot really well. The special effects, when they're there, are all really good. Overall, I just think super, super strong.
I think what's so admirable about Die Hard is it aims really high with its spectacle and special effects and action and everything. And when you aim high and you not only stick the landing, but you make it the best gosh darn landing you've ever had, it's just really awesome to see. The explosions look really good and the helicopters look good. And even the scene where Hans is falling to his death looks really good. And I say that because in RoboCop it looked less good. And in Aliens you have the mother xenomorph falling to its death. And I'm like, good. Yeah, that's a miniature. It looked really good when Hans fell to his death. Right. As weird as that sounds to say. But I think that Beyond that, I think that the visuals still are very impressive. I like the sort of golden hour effect at the beginning when they're traveling to the tower.
And I did say this in the last section as well. The set design is really impressive, considering it's all confined to one place. The fact they're able to be they have such a variety of sets for this one building is really, really cool. And they could have just phoned it in, but they decided to really make every place in the building, every floor look different and interesting.
They made the most out of the setting for sure. And it didn't ever feel like contrived where it's like, oh, like, of course, why are they like in this random thing? That's not part of the same building. It all felt very cohesive. And from a production,
different and interesting.
Yeah, cohesive but different and interesting, which is a production designer's job, and they nailed that extremely well. And like I said, the golden hour effect at the beginning I think looks really nice, and it really puts you into the California vibe that you would want to have. I really like the low-key lighting that they have, the high contrast. And then they have a very dark red or red hue to everything at the end for the climax.
I agree with all of the above. Movie has very iconic shots for good reason. And I like that even though it's more grounded when they have higher impact things, like they have the tank coming through from the police, and then they have rocket launchers. So there's explosions in this movie. Usually when you have too many explosions, then it gets a little campy and cheap, kind of like Transformers movies.
Yeah.
This movie makes sure to make great use of when it has explosions. They happen at very narratively important moments.
Right.
And like the scene where he drops the C4 on them is probably my favorite one. I just think that all concludes very well.
Awesome.
And it's just it's such a cool moment.
Beautifully framed shot too, him just looking down the shaft as it drops.
Another one of my favorite cuts is when he's the roof explodes. He's on the roof. He has to get off, so he hooks it to something and jumps off the building while like on a very questionable
hose or something.
And he's jumping off the building as the explosion's going on. I thought that was really, really fun.
Yeah. I mean, if I had to say any sort of negative, I would say that some of the explosions looked a little bit green screen at times. I don't even know if they were.
That's also the standard for now.
And that's the standard for now. But it didn't, like I said,
I didn't even notice.
I don't think I would dock any points for it, just to point it out. But really good stuff.
Yeah. Not the upper echelons of cinematography, but very, very good for what it is.
Lethal Weapon is also pretty good in this department. I think that they have a lot of pretty lights. One of my favorite looking shots is actually when they're at this Christmas tree deciding what they're going to do, and it's just red. It's got that same kind of red lighting that they had in Die Hard, but I like it because they're about to go and do something pretty violent, and so I kind of like that as they're discussing what they have to do. Mm-hmm. I think the shots where Mel Gibson is trying to kill himself. Not Mel Gibson, Martin Riggs. But Martin Riggs is thinking about killing himself. I think they have really good contrast in there, and I think the framing's really good. It doesn't aim quite as high as Die Hard, and so I think they pull off everything really good. Sometimes the editing's a little weird, and I don't think Die Hard suffers from that. Still a really good-looking movie. I don't have any real complaints. When you mentioned earlier in the podcast the scene where they're torturing Riggs, that looked super baller.
And in the set for that was also super strong. It looked like they were kind of in like a sewer underground complex sort of thing, and I just thought that was really cool.
Are there special effects in Lethal Weapon?
I mean, they have practical effects. I mean, they blew up a house.
The helicopter scene looked really nice.
They drove cars through houses.
Overall, I think that it had a very nice. It is very, very solid. I wouldn't put it on the same level as Die Hard, but I think Die Hard is really, really like up there.
I certainly think Die Hard aims higher, but I wouldn't say that I think Lethal Weapon is significantly worse or anything.
I think this is still better than a lot of the movies on this bracket.
Oh, for sure. Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Die Hard.
So for Die Hard, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. Realistically, it's probably more like a 9.5, but once again, we're not doing 0.5s. I think it was super, super well shot, and while Kyle said he didn't think it was in the upper echelon of cinematography, I low-key did.
I'm going to give Die Hard a 9 out of 10. Super, super good stuff. Aimed super high. It was a movie made in the 80s, so there's going to be some things that look a little bit dated, but for the time, it's really, really good. And I also think the cinematography is really, really solid.
Die Hard gets a 9 from me as well. Perfectly encapsulates the aesthetic you want from 80s action movies. Very impressive special effects and great use of cinematography, very iconic shots.
Now let's score Lethal Weapon.
For Lethal Weapon, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10 cinematography. Really, really good. I liked a lot of the shots, but there was some issues with the editing. Other than that, though, really, really solid and definitely better than most of the movies on this bracket.
I'm going to give Lethal Weapon a 9. I think it doesn't aim quite as high as Die Hard, but everything it sets out to do, it achieves pretty perfectly. So it's always great when a movie can do that.
I'm giving Lethal Weapon an 8 because it has very good cinematography, has some great shots, I like all the practical effects. I think maybe some shots could have looked better. The cinematography was not what was drawing me into most of the scenes, so maybe it could have done a little better.
For round 5, we have music and sound design, which is worth a total of 5 points from each of us. I think Die Hard sound is just really solid around the board. I think the music fits the movie, doesn't distract at all. In fact, I don't really find any of the music super memorable. I'm sort of new to Die Hard, but I can't think of any songs from the movie. I think the sound design is really good as well. You've heard me say it probably a billion times, and Fob, forgive me, the 80s crunch, 80s bite, 80s grit.
For you, this is just the 80s crunch category.
Yeah, the 80s crunch category. And you know what? It fulfills that really well. I think all of the sound effects are pretty solid around the board.
The one song that I remember well is when he's dropping the C4 down the elevator shaft. I remember that music pretty well because I think it helps that scene a lot to build the tension and the drama of that scene.
The funny thing I learned about the scoring, because Michael Kamen did the score for Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, actually, along with Highlander, which you've seen us review in the past. But apparently, when Carl pulls out his weapon, they actually stole that from Aliens because they didn't have the right movie. So that's a part of it's from the soundtrack Aliens. But yeah, the music fits the movie very well. I was never distracted by it at all. Moving on to Lethal Weapon. While similarly to Die Hard, I don't have a lot of themes that are just bouncing through my head when I think about it.
I do recall the music.
There is a distinct style.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think it sort of elicits a very noir type of detective feeling, and I think it fits the movie really well. It's like it feels iconic despite me never listening to it before, and I think what they do with the music works really well in that movie. Sound effects, I feel exactly the same about as Die Hard. It's the 80s crunch bite that I come to expect from these movies, and it delivers.
The music's better in this, definitely. It plays at much better moments. It helps enhance a lot of the scenes and add to the drama of a lot of them. And yeah, pretty solid all around.
Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Die Hard.
For Die Hard, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of music. Well, I do think it's slightly better than average, which would be like a 2.5. It didn't really do too much, to be honest.
I'm giving Die Hard a 3. Perfectly solid, satisfactory sonic experience.
I'm giving Die Hard another 3. I like some of the music and doesn't get in the way of the movie, and a lot of the sound effects help.
Now let's score Lethal Weapon.
So for Lethal Weapon, I'm giving it a 4 out of 5, just because I thought the music was more memorable and while still not intrusive.
I 100% agree with my brother. 4 out of 5 for Lethal Weapon.
I agree with both my cousins. Lethal Weapon gets a 4 out of 5. Better songs definitely help add to the weight of the scenes, and pretty nice sound effects.
For our final round, we have themes and motifs, which is worth 5 points from each of us. Die Hard, I would not classify as a thematically dense movie. I know, it's a shocker. I would say it's an actionly dense movie because it got a perfect score in action from all of us. But I still think that, it's got the simple stuff, and that's really all you need in a movie like this. You have the theme of overcoming crazy, unimaginable odds. I do like the little thing with him getting his wife back, I guess. Really, for me, there's not much here.
No, one of the only themes in the movie was kind of meh for me, which I didn't love it, which was kind of redemption for
the
cop. And I'm like, this dude shot a innocent kid, and he got put on a desk. I think he should have got put in prison. Not gonna lie. Hey, other than that, everything else is fine, I'd say. Just nothing super stands out to me.
No, I don't know. I think that scene, they do a fine job of showing how
It
serious it was, and
yeah,
being like, the actor portrays a lot of regret in it.
Hopefully bro survived. They didn't mention.
He did just say he shot him. He didn't say he died.
Lethal Weapon definitely has more strong themes, I'd say. Kind of getting over your suicidal thoughts with
the classic family and friends, sort of finding people that can help and support you a little bit. I'm not going to act like it's this crazy movie about all these themes, but I do think that Lethal Weapon, because just by the basis of it focuses more on its two protagonists and characters, has more ideas that it's toying around with. And I do agree, there's the pain of losing a loved one on both sides, you know, government corruption between these shadow governments that are running these heroin rings in Vietnam and stuff. I think they have interesting ideas around that. I think that family is a big sort of theme. They focus a lot on Roger Murtaugh's family and how happy he is and how much they love him, showing Riggs all alone, laying naked in his bed, and them sort of being loving towards him and inviting him into their house and taking care of him. And you can see it's something that he longs for and he can desire, and he misses that part of things. And not super complex at all, but I do think that they pull off those simpler themes very well. And I like that it's not afraid to go dark at times.
I mentioned it a little bit earlier. I like that there's a very stark contrast. It's almost funny to me, but it is well done in the movie, just how at the beginning you have Riggs just, like, for me it was this scene that I just wasn't expecting from this movie at all. Just completely serious and intense about, like, him about to kill himself. And then you contrast it with the end of the movie where it's like, oh yeah, I'll join them for Christmas time festivities.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny to me, but it's earned, definitely. And like the buildup of that over the course of the movie. And I think if you can have one strong theme instead of many half-baked themes, then that's definitely the way to go.
Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Die Hard.
So for Die Hard, I'm giving it a 2 out of 5 for themes. I think they're kind of half-baked a bit.
I'm going to give Die Hard a 1 just because there's literally no substance that I feel when it comes to themes for me, and it's very minimal, but it's not like offensive to me at all. I mean, I feel similarly about the themes of this movie as I do to the themes of Commando. This just thankfully has the benefit of being one of the greatest action movies and having an awesome narrative.
I'm going to give Die Hard a 2 for themes and motifs. I don't think the lack of them hurts this movie too bad, and I'm not going to say it has nothing going for it in that category, but you'd really have to search, and it's just not helping the movie.
Now let's score Lethal Weapon.
So for Lethal Weapon, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for themes. I think there's actually a lot of strong themes of themes of depression and getting over that, family. I feel like the themes of family are definitely stronger in this movie, and overall I think it's pretty good.
I'm going to give Lethal Weapon a 4. I don't think that it's a super strongly thematic movie, but every theme that it has I feel is strongly executed. Lethal Weapon did a good job.
Gave Lethal Weapon another 4 out of 5. I really like how it handled its themes. It touched on very serious topics very appropriately for a movie of its time, and it's kind of daring to show your main male lead with such weakness.
We have done the math. We have tabulated the scores. Bob, share your scores for Die Hard versus Lethal Weapon.
We have Die Hard at 44 out of 50 points, and we have Lethal Weapon at 42 out of 50 points.
I gave Die Hard a 41 out of 50 and Lethal Weapon a 43 out of 50.
I gave Die Hard a 44 out of 50 and Lethal Weapon a 41.
The total scores for Die Hard is 129 out of 150, and Lethal Weapon's total scores is 126 out of 150, which means that your winner today is Die Hard. Thank you guys so much for watching today's episode and hopefully sticking around for our 80s action tournament. Once again, I'm going to drop a link right up here in one of these corners if you guys missed any of our previous episodes and you want to catch up on all of the round 1 picks and round 1 matchups. However, round 2 shouldn't be too far away. We're going to be changing things up this next time.
New
categories, new scoring methods, hopefully to expedite this process just a little bit. We will see you later.